I am a professor of philosophy at St. Louis University, and my specialty is kind of the history of philosophy. Plato, Aristotle, Aquinas, Hume, and Kant are ones I'm interested in. And I, a few years ago, got interested in theory of games. And Rachel said, you'll be on our program again this year. And I said, well, I can't see that well. My eyes are really, really going. She said, well, you can do something. I said, all right. I said, what's your topic? And she said, government failure and political failure. So I like to look at things from a both philosophical and historical point of view, and I want to show you how old this problem is and what the arguments were early on, back with the Greeks, over private and public goods, and how those issues continue. And at a certain point, I'll bring in some game theory, because I can help you see how we've really made an advance in the 18th century with the notion of some effects can be the results of human actions without being the results of human intentions. We can either hurt or help each other, but we're not intentionally doing so. And that was really not understood by the Greeks. They thought if you hurt someone, it was intentional. If you helped someone, it was intentional. There was, if you would, no science of unintended effects. And I think that really hurt Greek ethics and Greek social philosophy. They thought, if you would, it's unintended effect, it's got to be a chance event, and if it's a chance event, there's no sciences about it. Whereas, as I understand economics, so much of it is, if you would, a science of unintended effects. So you just eliminated, if you would, a valuable way of understanding social sciences as interactions with outcomes which weren't necessarily intended by the agents who were interacting game theoretically, and but they have consequences with respect to their preferences. So I've titled this thing Plato's Conceit, which is an expression I found in Governor Bradford's story about the Plymouth plantation. It started out as an economic failure, and he turned it into something of an economic success. And the key to it here was not technology, but defining of property rights. That it wasn't, the story we got is it worked because the Indians showed him how to grow corn. I don't think that was the problem, or at least that's not the way Governor Bradford puts it. He went from, if you would, a system of public ownership of the land in Plymouth Plantation to private ownership, and productivity just rose quickly. And he puts this point down, and he condemns Plato for being the one who made him the idealist, to think that somehow we could all be friends and work together if we had, if you would, a community with no private ownership. Kind of the illusion that everyone suffers when they're 18. Like, why can't we get along? Well, we'll see. So, yes, so it's about public goods and private goods looked at from a historical point of view. The notions of public goods and private goods I'm going to use really fit Plato and Aristotle, but the more modern definitions of them are, a public good has two properties: jointness of supply, no one individual by consuming it will use it up completely, and the other is non-excludability. If you have a well-defined public or not so well-defined public, anyone in that public or that group can take advantage of, consume, or use as much of the public good as they want for their own purposes. Whereas in private ownership, the key feature is non-excludability. Or excludability. You can exclude others from using the good unless they get your agreement. They can either beg for it, you say, oh, I need this, will you give it to me? And you could give a gift. Or you could say, hey, I have something you want, do you want to trade? That would be an agreement. Or I guess you could try to steal it, then of course you've got crime. But basically you've got to get the agreement of the owner of the good. And if you do that, then you have use of it. As you're the owner, you're a loaner, or you're a recipient of a gift. So those are the concepts I'm going to use. You would find those especially the private ownership notion in Aristotle. It's clearly there. I think it's in his rhetoric where he defines it that way. So those are the two concepts I'm going to work on. Public goods, jointness of supply, non-excludability, and the non-excludability can be a result of the law or just the costs of trying to exclude people. So something like education can be private or public on the basis of the law. So you could take a good, if you would, which would be neither public or private in itself. It becomes public or private by virtue of the law. Or some might be kind of naturally public because it's just too expensive to exclude people from its use. The law doesn't make it that way. It's just kind of the nature of the thing. So I'm going to use those two. And I'm going to talk about the public goods problem as it emerges in Aristotle's mind as opposed to in Plato's mind. I don't know how many of you have taken philosophy, but it's a bad point that philosophers always start you with Plato's Republic. It was just, somebody said thank you. I remember that people said democracy starts in Athens, so the first book we're going to read is Plato's Republic. And there was a disconnect there, total disconnect. Well, Plato, of course, was very upset with Athenian democracy, and he was proposing a counter. And so they start you with, if you would, the people who didn't like it, which is Plato, and that's a bad thing to start students with because basically he is a communist. He wants for the elite a common ownership of the means of production, land, homes, and children and wives. It's very communalist. So let's look first at the Republic, where Plato proposes in his ideal state, and that's not a very good way to go about philosophy often, looking for the ideal. Aristotle's much more empirical, and we'll look for the facts. What about a public goods system? Public goods now in resources and wives and children. And he says there are two reasons that an ideal society would have these institutions, this institution. First of all, the state is smarter than the individual or the family. Much smarter. The state's going to be run by philosophers. And they know, they have seen the good. They have studied this. They haven't spent all their life in practical affairs thinking about how best to serve themselves. Philosophers have disengaged themselves and have made the dialectic up to the good and seen it. And what they see is this communal affair. And so that's the first thing. State is a much better educator than the family. And secondly, if we have no private ownership, we will get rid of that hated notion of mine versus thine. It's ours. We replace I with we. Somebody said that in a discussion the other day. I think it was our main speaker who said, watch the word we, watch the word we. So if I say, if we all do this, yes, but you don't act as a we, you act as a me or an I. And your interests might be quite different than the interests of the we. And so we get this problem of utopians looking at things in a kind of comprehensive way. And the poor little individual sitting there and says, yeah, that would be good, but I'm going to free ride on this if I can get out of it. So he says, if this mine-thine distinction causes, if you would, a selfishness and a conflict among people, and if we got rid of it, if I couldn't say this is my wife or my children or my land, things would be better. So we eliminate lawsuits, we eliminate all these sort of problems by getting rid of mine and thine, i.e. private property. And that's what these two arguments are, and you hear them still. State can teach your children better than the family. Now we have those who say, no, we want family homeschooling. We want private schools. We don't want the state to take everything over. But that argument is already there with Plato. Aristotle, and anybody who's taken introduction philosophy probably has not read Aristotle's Politics. That's just not something you get to. You do the Nicomachean Ethics, but you never get to the politics. And in the politics book 2, Aristotle says, I'll give you 4 reasons why Plato's wrong on his 2 arguments for private property. Now, Aristotle is not like having seen the good or has a big theory. He and his students have studied 158 constitutions around the Mediterranean, looking at their structures, their institutions, how their economies work. And he had them, if you would, write up a report of what they did. We had lost that. We knew in catalogs, ancient catalogs, that it was there. 158 of them, but we couldn't find the book. In the 19th century, one of them was found, the one that was written on Athens, the Athenian Constitution. And it was found in Egypt, and then they started finding more of it, and so we have it almost as a complete work, Aristotle's study of Athens. Now, this is a scientific study of it, not a critical one. Like, this is how they're set up. This is what happens. So he's basically a biologist. He's not out there criticizing. He's a biologist. He said, this is how it's structured, and this is what happens. So he looks at these constitutions. This is how it's structured. This is what happens. So he's the empiricist, whereas Plato is this idealist. So he says, in effect, he wrote the Politics having done that empirical study, and he divides the book into basically 2 parts. Those where I describe existing type of institutions and show you what they do, and then I'll give you an ideal, but I doubt whether we'll ever be able to bring it about. He thought maybe Alexander the Great could in the East, in the Asia. He could conquer it and then set up one of these, if you would, Aristotelian utopias. But Aristotle knew that in the Mediterranean world, we're not going to get an aristocracy. We're going to get an oligarchy or a democracy or a fight between them. And the only thing we can do, basically, is try to stabilize them. I can't give you true justice. Our conceptions of justice are a function of how we're raised. Some people will emphasize equality, some will emphasize freedom, and the argument can go on forever and ever. And as Aristotle wants to say, the true good is the apparent good to the good man. Now, if we haven't had right educations, we're going to have different conceptions of justice. And there's no way by argument we can settle this in Aristotle's mind. But he does say, I'll show you what happens when you don't have private property. So he says, if these are the things you don't want, then don't have a public goods arrangement. Have a private one. So there are 4 arguments he gives here. Are they here? Or is it the next sheet? Next one. Okay. So I've got my Plato and my Aristotle, my 2 arguments for, if you would, a public goods economy, namely reduction of conflict because there's no mine-thine distinction, and 2, we're going to put smart people in place, these philosophers who've really thought about this, and let them guide us. We need, if you would, a little humility and listen to them. The Aristotelian argument contrary to it is, number 1, and this is not the order he gives them in, but it's, for my purposes, it's quite good. He says, the virtue of generosity presupposes private property. And when you're generous, what you'll get as a response from other people is possibly gratitude. So the relationship is generosity and gratitude. But unless you have private property, you can't be generous. Now, I know a certain part of my taxes go to welfare. But I've never had anybody come up on the street and say to me, Bill Charron, did you pay your taxes? Yes. Thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. You don't get that. What they say is, I want more, right? That's what it is. So when you eliminate generosity from a society, you get people making rights claims. They have entitlements. I'm as entitled to this as you are, and they start fighting. And as I looked at the institution of saying grace before meals, I thought, this is really kind of an interesting institution. I wanted to look at it not just from a religious point of view, but from the point of view maybe of a philosopher, economist, or sociologist. Here you got these people. They all have entitlements to the food here. But you don't want them to come with that idea. Like, I'm entitled to as much of it as you are, and they've got weapons in their hands. So you say, okay, sit down, we're going to say grace. So you look at this whole thing as a gift, and then your attitude towards it is gratitude. And it goes much better. We're all friends. Whereas if we started out, I have entitlements, and damn it, you have a bigger piece of steak than I do, so I get more of this, and on it goes. We get the conflict. So generosity is a very important virtue in Aristotle for making a society go well. If people's idea is they have positive rights of entitlements to things, they'll fight each other. They'll have no respect for each other. They'll just want more. Whereas if they look at things from a point of view of some people have been gracious to others, the return will be gratitude. And that will make society run better. That's his kind of argument for the virtue of generosity. I don't think it's quite charity, but nonetheless, it presupposes private property. His second argument, what's that word? Independence. The second property is human happiness consists not in good being done, but they're doing good. And you can't do good unless you have the resources. I'm not saying, oh, everything's fine because somebody did it. I get no sense of justification from that. He says, what happiness consists in is doing and knowing that you are doing something that's noble. That constitutes happiness. It's not a feeling. It's a, if you would, a self-conscious action of doing noble things. And so he says, you can't do noble things if you don't have private property. I don't feel noble paying taxes. I don't put it in a mailbox and, I'm sure glad I did that. I walk in the footsteps of all the great giants of generosity. I don't. But if I can help a friend who's in trouble with my own resources, I do have that sense of not only good was done, but as an autonomous being, I did it. It's mine. I want to do it. And that's very important. When you read Aristotle's Ethics, it's not only about the good, it's about doing the good and knowing that you do the good. Think about how Greek art works, where so much of it is what? People looking at other people doing noble acts. And they want to be seen themselves. I'm going to emulate them. I want to see myself as a person who does noble acts. The word in Greek is kalon. And the same word is for beauty. Beauty and nobility are the same word in Greek. So Aristotle says happiness consists in doing acts that have this property of kalos, or they are the noble. And that means beautiful or noble. And so you want to be, quote, a beautiful person in character and acting, but you need private property for that. You can't, if you would, be under the thumb of someone else and at their beck and call and have to, if you would, take leave of them to do what you're going to do. So that's the second thing. It's the necessity of autonomy to live, if you would, the good and moral life. And you're going to need private property for that. And he talks about different amounts of private property, distinguishes two kinds of generosity. And one where you have large amounts of money and you use it for great efforts. You use it for building a library and so on. Or you have smaller amounts of money and you do it to help your friends in a smaller way. But there are different levels here. So he recognizes inequality of wealth. There's a kind of a shabby way to use your wealth. I loved Higgs talk about what there's many prostitutes in Washington, D.C. as in Wall Street and so on. Not using them on prostitutes, but using them on something that you would find noble and not want to hide the fact that you're doing that. That's happiness. What's this next word here?
Conflict reduction.
Yes. He argues that it's true if you have a private property system, you're going to have to define property rights, and there's going to be disputes over where the line is and so on, and there may be some properties that aren't well defined as to own, and we're going to have to decide who owns them. So you're going to have lawsuits about property. You're also going to have lawsuits about contract. Did you or did you not fulfill your contract? And people who look at that say, oh, this is a litigious society. I just hate this. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. And he says, try to live together in harmony where everybody owns everything. There's where your conflict starts. There's where your conflict starts, because people will, if you would, gripe about how much they put in and other people didn't to the common good. So he says, you don't even know. You're just imagining what conflict will be eliminated by public ownership. It won't be. It'll be a lot of grousing, and we'll get to that when we get to Bradford. You'll have, of course, lawsuits. You'll have about contracts. You'll have lawsuits about property and the like, but that's not a result of the private property system. And those of you who know Christianity from St. Augustine on will say it's a result of original sin. Aristotle says the wickedness of men. The way you handle that wickedness of men is private property, because you can't rely upon, if you would, this universal benevolence of everybody. You're better protected by a private property system. So that's his third one. Where was it here? Conflict reduction. And then the fourth one, which was actually the first one he gave, it's more efficient. That people take care of and nurture and are more inventive with things that are their own. He didn't put it in these terms. He didn't say the benefit of their innovation and effort returns to them rather than to others, but that's the idea. He realized the efficiency of a private ownership. So those are the four arguments that come out of Aristotle for private property. And I don't know of any new ones. I think that's about it. That's about it. Economists like this one down here, maybe other people, some of the other ones, but those are basically the arguments. So that's Plato and that's Aristotle. I might want to mention two more things here. I didn't put it on the sheet. Aristotle's arguments for private property were reinstituted in the 13th century by Thomas Aquinas. As you know, Aristotle's works were lost to the Western world when Justinian closed the schools in Athens. And so all the philosophers and all the thinkers had to go east, and they went to Baghdad. And about that same time, the Arabs got a hold of the Greek thought and could, if you would, benefit by Greek thinking. And they brought it across North Africa and brought it into Spain. So two of the big Arabian philosophers who are also Muslims, and it's the West who called them Arabian, some of these are Persians. One was Avicenna, or Ibn Sina, and the other one was Ibn Rushd, or Averroes. And in the 12th and 13th century, there was a big effort to translate out of the Arabic and out of the Greek the texts of Aristotle into Latin. And of course, Europe didn't know any other languages than vulgar languages like German and English and French and Italian, but they all knew they had a common language, Latin. So Latin became available to all educated people at the universities and became, if you would, core texts at the University of Paris, Oxford, Cologne, Cambridge, and so on. So Aristotle was quite an important character because of the Arabs and was, if you would, a resistance to Platonic thinking. because Platonic thinking had already directly gotten into the West through St. Augustine. St. Augustine was a Neoplatonist. Anselm was a Neoplatonist. So if in Western Europe, if you had Greek philosophy, it was Platonic, but the Aristotelian view of things came in the 13th century. Albert the Great and Thomas Aquinas are the ones who made the synthesis. And Thomas, in his Summa Theologiae, raised the Aristotelian arguments. He was totally convinced of them. He represented them in the Summa Theologiae. Now, just to go through history, how this keeps coming back. In the 19th century, the Catholic Church was quite afraid of the growth of socialism in Europe. Of course, it was no good for it because it loses land that way. People would just confiscate their land and they would be pushed back further and further into the Vatican. So Leo XIII says we need, if you would, an intellectual pushback to the Enlightenment ideas and the socialist ideas that are in Europe, that are dominating Europe. And he wrote an encyclical in which he resurrected Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle's arguments for private property. Now, I don't know about the current Pope. He talks about social justice and so on. I don't think he's quite savvy how you handle the press yet, but I'm worrying what direction he's going to go in. I have a sneaking suspicion he's a little more socialistic than I am. But that was the revival of Thomism. Thomism had a political reason for being. It was countering socialism. And Catholic schools and universities and seminaries taught Thomism as, if you would, a pressure against the Enlightenment ideals that were coming through Europe. Of course, those ideas were reinforced again. I'm getting off now into the history of philosophy, so I'll leave it there. It was a pushback to, if you would, socialism. And that's how I ran into it as a student. But we had to read the encyclicals of Leo XIII, and I thought, oh, this is really interesting stuff. And we had a seminar which ran a whole year. Every student in the college had to participate. It met 10 times, and the topic was capitalism. And we read all of these works. We'd all sit together in groups of 10, and every month we'd had read a certain number of works, and we'd talk about these with people from other departments and so on. And that year, that first year I did this was my junior year, the topic was capitalism. And to me, that was one of the greatest, if you would, educational experiences I've ever had, because I had to talk with biologists, economists, and I was in philosophy and so on. I was reading books I would have never read before. And it was put together around a theme. Okay, does this say Plymouth? Plymouth. As you know, the Puritans ultimately separated from the Church of England. They went to Netherlands for freedom. They found they didn't want their kids to grow up as little Dutch kids. So the idea was to come to this country. And they wanted to go to the Virginia colony. But they never made it. They made it to Massachusetts. And I think the plantation was, you can date it as 1621. I think they left in 1620, 1621 it's set up. And they had a governor who died fairly early on. I think his name was Carver, if I'm not mistaken. And then Bradford took over, and his right-hand man was Miles Standish. And at first, he said, what we did is we had a great big agreement that the land was to be held in common, and everybody was to work it. And then we'd all share the fruits of it. So that sounds fine, because we're all comrades, aren't we? Or citizens, or whatever you're going to say, friends. And so they did. They tried that. And things didn't go so well. what happens? Everybody starts complaining about they're doing too much work, which is what Aristotle said. You're going to have a fight between those who think others don't do enough work for the common good. And it's going to be a huge point of conflict. And so I'm going to have Professor Duchamp read. This is out of Bradford's kind of autobiographical report of his experience as the governor of Plymouth. And this is Plymouth under the communal system, okay?
Okay. The experience that was had in this common course and condition tried sundry years, and that amongst godly and sober men, may well evince the vanity of that conceit of Plato's, and other ancients applauded by some of later times, that the taking away of property and bringing the community into a commonwealth would make them happy and flourishing, as if they were wiser than God. For this community, so far as it was found to breed much confusion and discontent, and retard much employment that would have been to their benefit and comfort. A, the young men that were most able and fit for labor and service did repine that they should spend their time and strength to work for other men's wives and children without any recompense. B, the strong, or men of parts, had no more in division of victuals and clothes than he that was weak, and not able to do a quarter the other could. This was thought injustice. C, the aged and graver men to be ranked and equalized in labor and victuals, clothes, etc., with the meaner and younger sort, thought it some indignity and disrespect of them. And D, for men's wives to be commanded to do service for other men, as dressing their meat, washing their clothes, etc., they deemed it a kind of slavery. E, neither could many husbands well brook it. Upon the point of all being to have alike, and all to do alike, they thought themselves in a like condition, and one as good as another. And so, if it did not cut off those relations that God hath set amongst men, yet it did at least much diminish and take off the mutual respects that should be preserved among them. And would have been worse if they had been men of another condition. Let none object this is men's corruption, and nothing to the course itself. I answer, seeing all men have this corruption on them, God in his wisdom saw another course fitter for them.
That sounds like Aristotle. I mean, the same arguments. And what are the people's complaints? The people's complaints that it's unjust. The fellows who do a lot say, it's unjust that I don't get more and these bums get something. And the other ones, I don't want my wife to be a slave. So the criticism of the system is always under the rubric of justice of some sort. And as Aristotle said, when you get to arguments about justice, it's going to be endless. It's going to be endless, because the way you see justice is a function not of your knowledge, but of your character. And your character is a function of how you are educated. That's the Aristotelian view of practical knowledge, not theoretical knowledge, but practical knowledge. You see the world through eyes that have been, in terms of their emotions and desires, shaped by their background. What's going to look good to you is a function of how you were educated. So Aristotle clearly distinguishes between speculative knowledge and practical knowledge. Practical knowledge, he says, is not gotten through logic, it's gotten through habituation and training. And so when you have your children, you have to be very careful, according to Aristotle, what the children like and dislike. If there's something you consider bad, and you're the boss, and they like it, stop that liking. Move them away from it, because that will change their views as to what constitutes fairness or goodness or justice. But basically, that's the argument. The people are arguing about it. So he says, what am I going to do? He always talks in the third person. He didn't say what I'm going to do. What's the governor going to do? And he said, so what I did is I divided the land up to families. I gave each family a plot of land. So it was still commonly owned, but in a way it was yours for that year. And the young men who had no families would be divided up among the families. So if they had an individual male, say, okay, he is in your family, he's in your family, he's in your family. Lo and behold, he said, magic, we got productivity. We got productivity. Now here's this discussion of productivity.
Plymouth under a private property system. So they began to think how they might raise as much corn as they could and obtain a better crop than they had done, that they might not still thus languish in misery. At length, after much debate of the things, the governor, with the advice of the chiefest among them, gave way that they should set corn every man for his own particular, and in that regard trust to themselves, in all other things to go on in the general way as before. And so assigned to every family a parcel of land according to the proportion of their number for that end, only for the present use, but made no division for inheritance, and ranged all boys and youth under some family. This had very good success, for it made all hands very industrious, so as much more corn was planted than otherwise would have been by any means the governor or any other could use, and saved him a great deal of trouble, and gave far better content. The women now went willingly into the field, and took their little ones with them to set corn, which before would allege weakness and inability, whom to have compelled would have been thought a great tyranny and oppression.
Okay, there it is. I mean, that's the Aristotelian argument. You always look for a reason not to contribute to the common good. Say, I have a sick grandmother. You're asking me to do that? How unjust and how unfair can you be? Anyway, oh, God, that hurts. Oh. You can always think of a reason, and it's a justice reason, because you're looking for their sympathy and say, oh, yeah, you can't do that. You know how that works. Okay, so that's the Plymouth experience. And what else do I have here? You read these two, so I can flip. I think you're there. Okay. Now I'm going to try to bring a little bit of game theory, not much, a little bit of game theory to explain why, if you would, this situation happened. Why, if you would, when property is held in common, there's, if you would, mutual harm, and why, if property is held individually and free trade is allowed, why there's mutual benefit. And neither of those outcomes is intended. Okay. So the kind of general formula here is, here it is. Someone, this is my general formula, given anyone, upside down A, given any individual, if the cost of their contribution to a benefit is greater than that benefit to themselves, they'll try to free ride. They won't do anything. It would be stupid for them to do it. If their cost is greater than the benefits going to be returned to them for their cost, why suffer the cost? Now, it seems as though when you have common property, that's what happens. That you have the cost of producing or saving, but most of the benefit goes to others and only a little bit of it to you. Because everybody, if you would, benefits from your effort. So when you do the calculus from an individual point of view, you say, gosh, I can get some of the benefits and have none of the costs, and so you want to free ride. So given any individual, and so it's A, it's universal. If the cost to them of contributing to the public good is greater than the benefit they received, not the total of in the public good, then they're going to try to free ride. They're going to say, oh, I couldn't do it, you know, my leg hurts, I got to take care of the children, or whatever it is. Because you say, well, if you went out there and you did work in the yard, would it really improve your condition? Say, no, I'd just be tired and just a minimum amount. So this has been argued, I think successfully so, is what's known as the classical prisoner's dilemma. That when you create public property, you create a prisoner's dilemma. And this was a game developed in the 50s just by chance when some mathematicians were throwing numbers in a matrix and seeing some of their strategic properties. So let me show you how this kind of works. Can you see this board here, over here? Are we all right? Okay. All right. We've got here a 2x2 matrix, but I could make it a matrix with 3 persons in it. I've got that in the paper there, but we'll just do it with 2. Yes, sir?
I'm sorry.
Okay. I'm going to make player 1 the red player, and he has 2 choices. He can either contribute to the common good, or he can try to free ride. Not do anything, but just take the benefits the other guy provides him. Player 2 can do the same thing. He can either contribute or be a free rider. Now, if they both contribute, we're going to have something. 2. We'll make it better than nobody contributing, which would be everybody tries to be a free rider, we'd have 1-1. But a condition which is better for me is if you work and I free ride on your work. So I would get 3 and you wouldn't, there should be a 0 there. Imagine a 0 there. You get 0. Same thing here, it's a symmetrical game. If I contributed and you free rode, you would get part of the goods I've produced, but you wouldn't have suffered any of the costs. I take those numbers as ordinal numbers rather than cardinal. So they just represent orders of preferences. I can make the point I want to make here without math any stronger than ordinal relationships. Now, this outcome here is what we call Pareto optimal. That is, there's no way to move from it without somebody being hurt. So if we go from here to here, who gets hurt? We're going from this box to this box. Who gets hurt? Player 2. If we go from here to here, who gets hurt? Player 1. If we go from here to here, who gets hurt? Both. So it's Pareto optimal. It's the best that can happen. Of course, an idealist says, we'll cooperate. So this is called Pareto optimal. Now the question becomes, and this is the crunch of game theory, could we agree upon both cooperating, and would this agreement be self-enforcing? Could you trust the other to follow through on their agreement? If I could get you to cooperate, what would be better for me to do? Not cooperate. Sucker you in, make you do the work, and I freeload on you. Same way the other way. So this is not a Nash equilibrium. A Nash equilibrium is a profile of strategies which, if you would, no one has reason of self-interest to do otherwise given what the other did. There's no temptation not to comply with it. And so if you make agreements, they better be Nash equilibrium because you can't trust the other. You've got to put Pareto optimality and Nash equilibrium together. A Nash equilibrium is, if you would, a profile in which it's a self-enforcing agreement. You have no reason to do otherwise. Well, what is Pareto optimal up here? This. What is the Nash equilibrium? Is this a Nash equilibrium? No. Player 1's want to get out of that right away. You say, I can agree to this, but he's going to go down here. Same thing here. The only Nash equilibrium is what? 1-1, freeloading, free riding. And this is the horrible situation. This is the horrible situation. I'm going to circle those two. Where's my pen? Did it roll off on the floor? Is this it here? Yeah. So, this is a Nash equilibrium, and this is a Pareto optimal outcome. This is horrible. What's the idealist going to, utopianist going to think in terms of? Pareto optimality. What's the realist going to think in terms of? Nash equilibrium. So, actually, Pareto optimality isn't a game theoretic concept. This is a game theoretic concept because this looks at it, if you would, from a kind of a collective point of view, whereas game theory always looks at it from the individual's point of view. So that's the situation we're in. Now, here there's mutual benefit, right? Here there's mutual harm. What's going to happen, you'll predict in this game, is they're going to harm each other. Is that what they wanted to do? Did I play this game and say, I'm going to harm you? I got there and say, you think in terms of, I'm going to save myself. I'm not going to let you sink me. I can make the agreement, but I'm protecting myself. So you make, if you would, a maximin move. You move where the worst that can happen is higher than the worst that can happen anyplace else. And that move is free ride. Free ride. So in a way, I can make that same argument without even showing you what's happening to me. What's the rational thing for me to do? Free ride. Because I get what? 3 rather than 1 and 1 rather than 0. I don't even have to know about you. So my motivation and my rationality was, if you would, maximin. Protecting myself against what I, or if you, it's also dominant, if you want to use that term. Things that are dominant are always maximin. So this is what happened. Same thing for you. We didn't intend mutual harm. That's what happened. It's what's called the unintended effects of a prisoner's dilemma. And the notion of an unintended effect of human action is in Aristotle. It's in his Physics book 2. And let me talk about Aristotle here and unintended effects. Aristotle tried to explain effects in terms of 4 causes: an efficient cause, an actor; a final cause, the end they have in view, the motive they have; the material cause, that's the thing out of which you're going to produce your effect; and the formal cause, that is the form or the structure you're going to introduce into that matter. Those are your 4 causes. Those are your 4 causes. And the effect then is going to look as a what? Intended effect of human action. And what he called a chance event would be you're acting for an end, but something else happens which you didn't anticipate. So that's called an unintended effect. And the example I use is, I can use it again. You came here. Can you give me a rational explanation of why you came here? And you say, well, we were required to by Professor Duchamp. I want to stay well in her eyes, so I'll hear this thing about what Plato's conceit or something like that, and that's why I'm here. So that's, if you would, the intended effect of that. And it's a rational one. But on the way here, you ran into an old friend that you haven't seen for years, and he's just on campus because he's here for the basketball tournament. Say, Charlie, what are you doing here? Are you going to this conference? And no, I just over here for the basketball. That's a chance event. It's the intersection of 2, if you would, intended lines of causality, but nobody intended it. It could be either good or bad. Could be either good or bad. Aristotle calls it a chance event. And he argues that there can be no sciences of unintended effects. None. And so there's no science of your meeting friends by chance. That held up economics for centuries. Because economics and social sciences, some utopian social science, is about unintended effects. Price formation is an unintended effect of interactions of buyers with buyers, sellers with sellers, and buyers with sellers. And nobody intends that price in a competitive market. So the understanding of a market becomes then impossible for Aristotle because he doesn't have any science of, if you would, unintended effects. He calls them chance effects, and he says they have to happen randomly. There's no way you can predict them to happen. So that's one of the points I want to make. Aristotle was, I think, good on private property, but he was very bad on this notion of unintended effects. The one who sees this, of course, is David Hume saw it, Adam Smith saw it, and in the 20th century, 21st century, Hayek, and 20th century too. He has actually a very good article on David Hume and the notion of unintended effects. But that was the beginning, through the Scottish Enlightenment, of, if you would, to me, intelligent social sciences. Now, let's switch over to private economy. I own something, resources. I have the ability to do nothing with them, or do something with them, try to improve them, maybe improve them in a way you'd be interested in. And I might be ready to trade if you're willing to trade at a certain price. And then you're the same thing. You can either leave it alone or you can produce it and translate it into something better. So our options as private owners are, and this is not a competitive market, you've only got two parties involved here, but that's a very simplification. I'm going to say you don't produce or trade. That's one option you have. Just sit on your stuff. Or you can produce and be willing to trade if the other's willing to trade. Likewise, you can not produce and not trade because you have nothing to trade. Or you can be a producer and willing to trade if somebody else is willing to trade. So, if neither of us produce or trade, well, these are ordinal numbers now, 0, 0, where we haven't improved anything. If I produce and I'm willing to trade but you're not, I'm a little better off because I've done something. At least I've made something for myself, but I couldn't get even more because I have some surplus I want to trade with you. So I get 1, but you're still 0. You got nothing. Same way here, 0, 1. But if we both produce and trade, then we get something we both wanted, 2, 2. Now let's look at the strategic properties of this. What is this in terms of Pareto optimality? It's Pareto optimal. We can't move without hurting somebody. But it's also what? A Nash equilibrium. And this is, if you would, the fundamental theorem of welfare economics, the convergence of, in a competitive market, of Pareto optimality of some sort and Nash equilibrium. So here, if you would, everything's wonderful. NE is equal to PO, whereas here they're opposite. And this is what many people have called, and I love it, this, well, let's go to here. This is called the invisible hand production. This I like to call the back of the invisible hand. You didn't intend to hurt them, but darn it, you will, as the unintended effect. Now, I think there's some more. What does this say, Rachel? Okay, I've got that.
Escaping public goods dilemma.
Oh, I thought I was almost done with this lecture. I want to take a breath. How can we escape the public goods dilemma without private property? Can we do it? Can we do it? Can we do it? Well, the first thing, of course, you're going to have not free provision of goods, but you're going to have, if you would, compulsory provision. You have to switch from one to the other. If you leave it free, everybody's going to be a free rider, so you have to have it compulsory. And the compulsor is going to be the state or the government, and they're going to be a monopoly compeller and supplier, which is never very good if you know the problems that are connected with incentives to innovate of somebody who is a monopolist. The second problem is, these are the dangers of being a monopolist supplier. One, lack of innovation on your part to do well. Think of the post office. What does this say, Rachel?
Over-provision.
Over-provision. Let me tell you about this. This is my favorite story. I used to own a private home, and then I thought, I want to move into a condo. So I moved into a condo, and there are 40 units in it. It was built in 1924, so all the heat, all the electricity, and all the water are, if you would, group or public goods. You can use as much of them as you want. The problem is we have compulsory contribution. At the end of the year, they say, here are your bills, folks. We divide them up equally. You pay 1/40th, you pay 1/40th, you pay 1/40th of this bill. Say, oh, okay, okay. So they're complaining. Said, look at the size of this electricity bill. Electricity is so expensive. Please, people, please conserve. I mean, if you leave your home, let's say for a week, don't leave it at 65 degrees. You're just wasting all of that. And the person thinks, yeah, that's right, we'll save. We'll save. That's a lot of money we'll save. What do we say? Will. We will. Question is, how much will I save if I don't do it? So I think, well, let's see. If I cut down and I come home and it's going to be hot for about an hour or so, because this is St. Louis and it's August, and I think, long trip and it's hot, now I have to turn the thing on. I've saved the people 3 or 4 days of my use of the air conditioning, but I've saved them that much. How much have I saved myself? And you think, well, what's the benefit that returns to me? 1/40 of my own use. What, you mean if I use this good, I only have to pay a fraction of it? That's wonderful. Who pays the rest? The others. So you can put the cost of it on them. You're suckers. You're suckers. So that's what happens. That's the condo I'm in. Locked in. And you know, you get mad sometimes, say, bye, Dan. I leave and I go, oh, I'm at the elevator. I better turn I'm going to be gone a couple hours. I better turn that electricity down. I don't want to go back. What the heck? What am I saving myself? So that there's a built-in over-provision because of compulsory contribution. Producing too much. And we know it's too much because the people are all complaining, our bills are too high. We want to use that money for something else. But we're compelled because of compulsory contribution. Then, recently I used to go out with a woman. She was in her 90s, and her husband had died a couple years before my wife died, and so we got together and we'd go out for dinner. We were kind of lonesome and we had things to talk about. She talked about children and I talked about children, hers. And, but anyway, she was enjoyable. I shouldn't have said that. We had a lot of fun. And I'm talking about the dead now. She died last year in her sleep, which I'm happy about. What a way to go. And I said, Francis, I said, I just hate going to doctors. I'm 76 now, and, you know, my best friends are doctors. It's just, I'm always going to a doctor. And I said, I just hate to go to doctors. And she says, you do? She says, I love to go to doctors. I said, why do you like to go to doctors? She says, they talk to me. And I thought, oh my God, think of Medicare. How many people are going to doctors so the doctor will talk to them? And then I thought further, oh my God, if they get all sorts of therapy on Medicare, this country is hungry for therapy. They have an infinite desire for this stuff. I don't know anybody, well, some I do, who hasn't been to therapy. Oh, I go to therapy. For what? Read Aristotle. What's wrong with you? You know, it's terrible. So the therapy thing just bothers me. If you're on therapy, I don't mean to. But anyway, I remember standing in line at Walgreens, and there was 2 women in front of me, and one says, oh, hi, Ellen, how are you? Fine. She said, what are you doing? She said, I'm doing gardening. She said, oh, that's wonderful. And she said, how do you like it? She said, it's great therapy. As a kid, I never thought of a garden as therapy. I thought of it as beauty. But it's like America is a hospital of all these patients, you know. Have you all heard everything I've said? Some of you probably have not. You need to be on drugs. Keep your attention up here. It's a crazy world. It's a crazy world. So it frightens me when I think about healthcare and therapy and doctors and aging people and lonely people and so on and so forth, because there's going to be over-provision. Over-provision comes with compulsory contribution. And the compulsory contribution can either be taxes or it can be deficit spending. Future people take care of it. What else do I have here? Oh, crowding. Okay, so the government says, we can't have all these people spending it. Our whole budget's going to this stuff, to therapists. They're the richest people in the world, or will be. Richest people in the world. We've got to what? Ration it. Now, when you ration it, does that mean people will just walk away? They'll say, oh, it's a ration, we can't get any. No, because the cost is still the same to them individually, and they'll start standing in line. So long lines will be predicted if you have rationing on a compulsory supplied public good. And we saw that, at least I saw that with Nixon, and lived through World War II. They had rationing and long lines and so on and so forth, but that seems to be the problem. So there seems to be no way out of this thing. You've got an inefficient group that's either compelling you to give you more than you really want individually, although the group keeps eating it up, or they, if you would, cut it off, in which case you then stand in line, waiting for your turn, because it's no more expensive. You just wait there for it. And then what's the next one?
Skewing taxes.
Oh, that's the easy one, skewing taxes. Let's say, now who's going to pay for it? Well, we'll make these Kansans pay more than these Missourians for this particular public good. I had a piece of property in Florida, and it was on the coastline, and the insurance would have been enormous had I done it privately. And thank God some politician made the federal government subsidize the insurance on my house living on the beach. And I said, thank you. I can live on the beach here because some poor farmer in Kansas who has no interest in this whatsoever is subsidizing me in my insurance so I can live here. And I went to that farmer and I said, thank you, thank you, no, I did not. I didn't want him to know that that was what was happening, because he might get upset. So skewing is, of course, always a problem, always a problem. And then there's also this problem, the problem of which Buchanan and Tulloch and all of those have talked about is the rent-seeking problem. What you're going to do then, if the government can, if you would, determine who pays for what and what kind of public goods we're going to get and how, if you would, we're going to distribute them, you're going to, if you would, replace engineers with lobbyists who would go to Washington to, if you would, buy the politician out. And so you've got to, if you would, both try to get politicians on your side and have your counter lobbyists. So you've got my lobbyists and your lobbyists. And that's inefficient. That's a social cost that doesn't help anything. We're not producing the good. What we're doing is allowing the politicians to be as corrupt as they are. Here's the possibility. So lobbying seems to be, the possibility of skewing makes lobbying reasonable. And what do we have here?
Privatization solution.
Already put that on the board.
Is privatization the solution? And I've got a couple of quotes.
And a couple of quotes, okay, at the very end. Please.
Okay, here's how Adam Smith put the point. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. And again, he intends only his own gain, and he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. Nor is it always worse for the society that it was not part of it. By pursuing his own interests, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it.
Okay, now let me mention something. Who did he mention we don't have to rely upon his benevolence to help us?
Butcher, brewer, baker.
Butcher, brewer, baker. Okay. Did he mention politicians? Did he mention mom and dad or your wife? In Smith, he's talking about the economy. And they also wrote another book called Treatise on Moral Sentiments. And in that, of course, the basic moral motivation is sympathy. And that, he thinks, takes place within the family, as did Hume. So questions of justice within an economy are one thing. Questions of morality within your closed circle is something else. They're not that individualist. They're kind of more familiarly oriented. And so I expect, from my wife, or expected from my wife, benevolence. not because of her self-interest and so on and so forth. So be very careful about what he's saying here. Not the politician, not the parent, not the king, not the children, but the butcher, brewer,
baker.
And the baker. The next quote.
Okay, and then Aristotle from his Politics. Collectivization has a specious appearance of being benevolence. Men readily listen to it and are easily induced to believe that in some miraculous manner everybody becomes everybody's friend, especially when someone is heard denouncing the evils now existing in states, that is, lawsuits about contract, convictions for perjury, flattery for rich men, and the like. These evils are not due to private property, but to a very different cause, the flaws of human nature. Indeed, there are more conflicts among those who have all things in common.
And I want to put that, Father Biondi has put these great big things over the Grand so he can tell where St. Louis University is. I'd like him to put that quote. And if you would, stop the utopianism in the freshman year. Thank you.